Clara Whitmore stood on the front porch of Wind Hollow Ranch, rifle raised, aimed directly at the chest of the most dangerous man in Wyoming territory. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. "Get off my land," she said quietly, "or I'll put you in the ground, right here." The man who'd come to destroy her family took one look at her eyes and knew. This woman would pull the trigger. But 6 months ago, Clara was nobody. Just the plain daughter her own family used as a joke. The girl they thought would disappear into nothing. This is the story of how an invisible woman became unstoppable. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The parlor smelled like lavender and lies. Clara Whitmore pressed herself against the wallpaper, trying to take up less space while her sisters twirled in front of the mirror like they owned every inch of air in the room. Rose, golden-haired, 25, engaged to the banker's son, adjusted her silk collar and smiled at her reflection like it owed her money. Margaret, 21 and prettier than a painted sunset, practiced the laugh she used on suitors, high and sweet and completely artificial. Clara was 23, brown-haired, average-faced, and according to every person in Millbrook, Missouri, the unfortunate mistake between two masterpieces. "Mother says you're to press my traveling dress tonight," Rose said without looking at her. "The lavender one with the lace trim." "I already pressed it twice this week," Clara replied quietly. "Well, press it again. Charles is taking me to his family's estate in St. Louis, and I need to look perfect." Rose finally turned, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Not that you'd understand what that means." Margaret giggled. "Oh, Rose, don't be cruel." "I'm not being cruel, I'm being honest." Rose examined her nails. "Clara's practical. That's her gift. Some women are beautiful, and some women are useful." The words landed like stones. Clara had heard worse, years of worse. But tonight they hit differently. Maybe because she'd turned 23 last week, and nobody remembered. Maybe because she'd spent the entire day cooking, cleaning, and listening to her mother explain to the Reverend's wife how unfortunate it was that their middle daughter hadn't inherited the family's looks. "Practical girls make excellent housekeepers," her mother had said, voice dripping with false sympathy. "And we're so grateful Clara's willing to help around the house. After all, without prospects—" She hadn't finished the sentence. She didn't need to. Clara swallowed the familiar burn in her throat and turned toward the kitchen. Behind her, she heard Margaret whisper something and Rose's sharp laugh in response. That night, lying in the smallest bedroom, the one that used to be storage, Clara stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time someone looked at her like she mattered. Her father had, maybe, before he died when she was 12. He used to say she had a mind like a steel trap and hands that could fix anything. But he'd been gone 11 years, and his voice in her memory was fading like old paint. She didn't cry. She'd stopped crying about this years ago. Instead, she got up, lit a candle, and pulled out the book she'd hidden under the floorboards. A collection of frontier stories about women who'd gone west and started over. Women who'd left everything behind and built new lives in places where nobody knew their names or their histories. She read until the candle burned low, then hid the book again and went to sleep. She didn't know her sisters were already planning the joke that would change her life forever. The next evening, Clara was elbow-deep in dishwater when Rose and Margaret swept into the kitchen wearing matching grins that made her stomach drop. "Clara, darling," Rose purred, "we've done something wonderful for you." Clara didn't turn around. "What did you do?" "Don't be so suspicious," Margaret said. "We're trying to help." "You never help me." "Well, that's about to change." Rose pulled a newspaper from behind her back and slapped it onto the table. "We found you a husband." Clara's hand stilled in the water. "What?" "A mail-order bride advertisement," Rose explained, her voice bubbling with barely contained laughter. "Some desperate rancher out in Wyoming territory looking for a wife. No requirements except willing to work hard and ask no questions. Sounds perfect for you, doesn't it?" Margaret covered her mouth, shoulders shaking with giggles. "We wrote him a letter. In your name." The dishwater suddenly felt too hot. Clara turned slowly, drying her hands on her apron. "You did what?" "Oh, don't look so horrified," Rose said. "It's just a joke. Some lonely cowboy will write back asking for your photograph, and when he sees it, he'll..." "He'll what?" Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. Rose blinked, surprised. Clara never interrupted. Well, he'll obviously realize the mistake and… You put my name on a letter to a stranger? A man I've never met? In Wyoming? It's harmless, Margaret insisted. He probably won't even respond. And if he does, we'll just explain it was a misunderstanding. You mean you'll explain it was a joke? Clara said quietly. You'll tell him your plain sister was so desperate that you had to invent a husband for her. Rose's smile faltered. Don't be dramatic. Get out of my kitchen. It's not your kitchen, Rose said, voice hardening. It's Mother's house, and you're just the help. Something cracked inside Clara's chest, not her heart. That had been broken so many times it barely registered pain anymore. This was different. This was the sound of every last thread of patience finally snapping. Get out, she repeated. Both of you. They left, laughing about how sensitive Clara was getting in her old age. Clara stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the table, staring at the newspaper advertisement they'd left behind. Rancher seeking practical wife. Must be willing to work. Must be honest. Must understand life on the frontier is hard. No romance promised. No lies tolerated. Wyoming territory. Reply to Garrett Hale. Wind Hollow Ranch. The words were blunt, almost brutal in their honesty. No flowery language, no promises of comfort or luxury. Just work, honesty, and hardship. Clara picked up the newspaper with shaking hands. Her sisters had written a letter as a joke. They'd probably described her as desperate, plain, and pathetic. They'd probably made her sound like exactly what she was, the leftover daughter nobody wanted. But what if she wrote her own letter? What if she told the truth? The thought arrived like lightning, sudden, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. She could leave. She could actually leave Millbrook, leave her mother's house, leave the sisters who treated her like furniture, and the town that looked through her like glass. She could go somewhere nobody knew she was supposed to be invisible. The idea was insane. It was also the first time in years she'd felt anything close to hope. Clara spent 3 days thinking about it. 3 days watching her mother ignore her at breakfast, her sisters order her around like a servant, and the town treat her like a ghost. 3 days remembering that she was 23 years old and had never made a single choice for herself. On the 4th day, she sat down with pen and paper. Dear Mr. Hale, my name is Clara Whitmore, and I need to be honest with you from the start. Someone else wrote to you pretending to be me, thinking it would be funny to answer your advertisement as a joke. But I'm writing now on my own behalf, and I'm telling you the truth. I'm 23 years old, I'm not beautiful, I'm not charming, I'm not the kind of woman men notice at church socials or write poetry about. I'm plain looking, practical, and used to hard work because I've been doing it my whole life. My family treats me like a servant in my own home. My sisters mock me. My mother tolerates me. The town I grew up in looks right through me like I don't exist. I spent my entire life being invisible, and I'm tired of it. I don't know anything about ranching. I don't know anything about Wyoming. I don't know if I'm strong enough for frontier life. But I'm smart. I'm honest. I can cook, clean, sew, and fix things. I learn fast. I don't complain. And I won't expect romance or kindness or anything except fair treatment and a chance to prove I'm worth something. If that's enough, write back. If it's not, I understand. Sincerely, Clara Whitmore. She sealed the letter before she could change her mind and mailed it the next morning. Then she waited. Days passed. A week. 2 weeks. Her sisters had forgotten about the joke entirely, already focused on Rose's upcoming wedding. Clara went back to her regular routine, cooking, cleaning, being invisible. But something had changed. She'd written the letter. She'd told the truth. She'd taken one small step toward the edge of a cliff she'd been standing on her whole life. And even if he never wrote back, even if nothing came of it, she'd done something for herself. That had to count for something. The reply came on a Tuesday. Clara found it in the mail and tucked it into her apron pocket before her mother could ask questions. She waited until everyone was asleep, then lit a candle and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Miss Whitmore, I appreciate your honesty. Most people don't have the guts for it. I'm 35. I've been ranching in Wyoming for 12 years. My first wife died 4 years ago. I have an 8-year-old son named Eli. The ranch is called Wind Hollow, and it's hard country, cold winters, hot summers, and work from sunup to sundown. I'm not looking for romance. I'm looking for a partner who can handle frontier life without falling apart when things get difficult. Someone who can run a household, help raise a boy, and not expect me to be something I'm not. I'm not a kind man. I'm fair, but I'm not soft. I don't lie, and I don't tolerate liars. I work hard, and I expect the same from anyone sharing my home. If you come here, you need to understand what you're getting into. This isn't a fairy tale. It's survival. The work is brutal. The isolation is worse. The town is small, and the people are suspicious of outsiders. You'll be cold, tired, and homesick. But you'll have a roof over your head, food on the table, and respect if you earn it. I won't treat you like a servant. I won't treat you like property. I'll treat you like a person who made a choice to be here. If that's enough, come to Wyoming. If it's not, don't waste our time. Garrett Hale. Clara read the letter 3 times. No sweet words. No promises of happiness. No lies about what life would be like. Just brutal, blunt honesty. And somehow it was the most respectful thing anyone had ever said to her. He wasn't pretending she'd be happy. He wasn't pretending it would be easy. He wasn't pretending she was anything other than what she was. A woman making a desperate choice because staying where she was had become unbearable. She folded the letter carefully and hid it in the same place she kept her frontier storybook. Then she made her decision. She was going to Wyoming. Telling her family was worse than she expected. Absolutely not, her mother said flatly when Clara explained she'd be leaving in 2 weeks. I won't allow it. I'm 23, Clara said quietly. You can't stop me. You're being ridiculous, Rose cut in. You're going to marry some stranger out west because of a joke Margaret and I made? I'm going because I choose to, Clara said, and because there's nothing for me here. Her mother's face went red. Nothing? We've given you a home, food, shelter, and made me earn every bite of it by being your unpaid servant, Clara finished. I'm leaving. I've already bought the train ticket. Margaret looked genuinely shocked. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. You'll regret this, her mother warned. You'll end up trapped on some filthy ranch with a brutal man who treats you worse than we ever did. Maybe, Clara agreed, or maybe I'll finally get treated like a person instead of a joke. Rose stood up, shaking her head. You're making a mistake. You'll come crawling back in 6 months begging us to take you in. Clara met her sister's eyes without flinching. I won't. She didn't tell them about Garrett's letter. She didn't explain her reasons. She didn't ask for their blessing or their understanding. She just started packing. The day she left, her mother didn't say goodbye. Margaret cried, though Clara suspected it was more about losing free labor than losing a sister. Rose watched from the window with a cold, satisfied expression, probably convinced Clara would fail and prove her right. Clara carried one small trunk to the train station, bought her ticket, and climbed aboard without looking back. And as Millbrook, Missouri disappeared behind her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Relief. The journey west lasted 8 days and changed Clara in ways she couldn't have predicted. The train cut through endless prairie, flat, golden, and bigger than anything she'd ever imagined. Other passengers shared stories of frontier life. A farm wife from Kansas talked about losing 3 crops to drought before finally making it work. A shopkeeper from Nebraska described winters so cold that livestock froze solid overnight. Wyoming's worse, an old rancher told her bluntly. Wind up there cuts through you like a knife. If your man's got a ranch near the mountains, winter'll test everything you've got. Clara listened to all of it. The women eyed her plain dress and worn trunk and asked gentle questions about where she was headed. When she explained she was meeting her husband at a ranch called Wind Hollow, their expressions shifted, some pitying, some impressed, all knowing. Mail-order bride? One of them asked. Clara nodded. Well, the woman said quietly, you're braver than most. Frontier life eats up women who expect it to be easy. But if you go in knowing it's hard, you might just survive it. I'm not expecting easy, Clara said. I'm expecting honest. The woman smiled. Then you might be exactly what you need to be. At night, Clara lay in her narrow berth and stared out the window at the stars, brighter and more numerous than she'd ever seen in Missouri. She thought about Garrett Hale's letter. She thought about his blunt warning that this wouldn't be a fairy tale. Good, she thought. She didn't want a fairy tale. She wanted something real, even if real meant hard. The train pulled into the Wyoming station on a gray, windswept afternoon. Clara climbed down onto the platform, gripping her trunk, and looked around at the raw frontier town. Wooden buildings, dirt streets, mountains looming in the distance like jagged teeth against the sky. And standing near the station, arms crossed, face unreadable, was Garrett Hale. She recognized him immediately, even though she'd never seen his photograph. He looked exactly like his letter sounded, hard, weathered, and stripped of anything soft. Tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his 30s, with dark hair, a scarred jaw, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and trusted too little. He spotted her too. Looked her over once, quick, assessing, nothing romantic about it. Then he walked over. "Clara Whitmore?" His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. "Yes," she said. "Garrett Hale." He picked up her trunk without asking. "This everything?" "Yes." "Good. Wagon's this way." No handshake, no greeting, no "welcome to Wyoming" or "glad you made it safely." Just business. Clara followed him to a battered wagon hitched to two tired-looking horses. He loaded her trunk, then offered her a hand up. She took it. His palm was calloused, his grip strong but not rough, and climbed onto the seat. Garrett swung up beside her, snapped the reins, and they rolled out of town without a word. The silence lasted a full 10 minutes. Finally, Clara spoke. "How far is the ranch?" 2 hours. "And your son?" "At the ranch with one of my men. Didn't see the point in dragging him into town." Another silence. "Thank you for coming to meet me," Clara tried. Garrett glanced at her. "You expected me to leave you standing at the station?" "No, I said I'd meet you, so I did." He turned his attention back to the road. "I keep my word. I expect the same from you." "You'll get it." He nodded once, and that was apparently the end of the conversation. Clara watched the landscape roll past. Sagebrush, wind, empty sky. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Nothing soft about it, nothing gentle, just like the man sitting beside her. After another stretch of silence, Garrett spoke again. "You understand what you signed up for?" "I think so." Thinking's not the same as knowing. Kept his eyes on the road. "Ranch work's brutal. House is old, winter's hell. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and the town doesn't trust outsiders. You'll be tired, cold, and probably homesick." "I won't be homesick," Clara said quietly. Garrett looked at her again, something shifting in his expression. "Your family that bad?" "They treated me like I didn't exist, or worse, like I existed only to serve them." He nodded slowly. "Well, you'll work hard here too, but you'll be treated fair. That's all I want." "Good." He paused. "I don't expect this to be a love match. I'm not looking for romance. I'm looking for someone who can handle frontier life and help raise my boy without falling apart." "I understand. Do you?" His voice was sharper now. "Because a lot of women come out here thinking they can change a man or change the life. They can't. This is what it is. If you're expecting me to be soft or sweet or anything except what I am, you'll be disappointed." Clara looked at him directly. "I don't want you to be anything except honest. I've had enough of liars and people who pretend." Garrett's jaw tightened. For a second, she thought she'd made him angry. Then he nodded. "All right." The wagon rattled on. Wind Hollow Ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun began setting. A collection of rough wooden buildings, corrals, and fences sprawled across a valley backed by mountains. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't welcoming. It looked like exactly what it was, a hard place built by hard work. Garrett drove the wagon up to the main house, a 2-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. "It's not much," he said, pulling the horses to a stop. "It's fine," Clara replied. He gave her a skeptical look, but didn't argue. "Come on, I'll introduce you to Eli." They climbed down, and Garrett led her toward the house. Before they reached the porch, the front door banged open, and a boy stepped out, small, dark-haired, serious-faced. "Eli." He looked at Clara with the same assessing stare his father had used at the train station. "You're the new wife?" he asked bluntly. "I am," Clara said. Eli studied her for a long moment. "You're not very pretty." Garrett's hand landed on the boy's shoulder. "Eli," but Clara laughed. It surprised all three of them. She laughed because it was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. No polite lies, no fake compliments, just a kid telling the truth. "You're right," she said, still smiling. I'm not. Eli blinked, confused. You're not mad? Why would I be mad? You're being honest. She crouched down to his level. I'm Clara, and I'm not here to be pretty. I'm here to work, help your father, and maybe learn how to survive out here without freezing to death. Think you can teach me? Eli looked at his father, then back at Clara. Maybe. Good enough, Clara said, standing up. Garrett was staring at her like he'd never seen anyone quite like her before. What? She asked. Nothing, he said quietly. Let's get you inside. The house was exactly what Garrett had warned it would be. Old, drafty, and barely functional. The furniture was worn. The walls needed paint. The kitchen looked like it hadn't seen a deep cleaning in years. But it was hers. Well, theirs. Garrett showed her to a small bedroom on the second floor. You'll sleep here. I'm across the hall. Eli's next door. Clara set down her trunk. Where did your first wife sleep? The question came out before she could stop it. Garrett's expression went cold. She's dead. Doesn't matter where she slept. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... Forget it. He turned toward the door. Supper's in an hour. Don't expect anything fancy. He left before she could respond. Clara sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked around the room. Plain walls, a single window, a dresser missing one handle. And for the first time in her life, it was hers. Not her mother's house where she was tolerated. Not her sister's space where she was invisible. Hers. She unpacked slowly, hanging her few dresses in the wardrobe, setting her books on the dresser. When she finished, she went downstairs and found Garrett in the kitchen, trying to cook something that looked like stew but smelled like charcoal. Need help? She asked. He glanced at her. You cook? Better than that, she said, nodding at the pot. Garrett stepped aside without argument. Clara took over, salvaging what she could and starting fresh with the ingredients she found in the pantry. It wasn't much, beans, dried meat, some limp vegetables, but she made it work. When she served supper, Garrett and Eli both stared at their plates like she'd performed magic. It's just stew, Clara said. It's the best thing I've eaten in 4 years, Garrett said quietly. Eli nodded, already halfway through his bowl. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence from the wagon ride. It was the silence of 3 people too tired and too hungry to waste energy on conversation. After supper, Garrett sent Eli to bed. Clara started cleaning the kitchen. You don't have to do that tonight, Garrett said. I know, Clara replied, but I'm doing it anyway. He watched her for a moment, then nodded and headed upstairs. Clara finished the dishes, wiped down the table, and stood in the quiet kitchen of Wind Hollow Ranch. 6 weeks ago, she'd been invisible in Millbrook, Missouri. Now she was standing in Wyoming territory, married to a stranger, raising a child she'd just met, and facing a life that promised nothing except hard work and honesty. And for the first time in 23 years, Clara Whitmore felt like she existed, like she mattered, like she might actually survive this. The first week at Wind Hollow Ranch taught Clara that survival and comfort were 2 entirely different things. She woke before dawn every morning to a house so cold her breath fogged the air. The stove fought her like a living thing, refusing to light until she learned its specific temperament, kindling arranged just so, damper adjusted precisely, patience she didn't know she had. By the time she got a fire going, her fingers were numb and her patience worn thin. Garrett was already gone by then, out in the fields or the barn or somewhere on the vast stretch of land that seemed to swallow him whole each morning. He left before she woke and came back after dark, exhausted and silent, tracking mud and snow across the floors she'd just cleaned. Eli watched her with those serious dark eyes, waiting for her to fail. The ranch hands watched her too, though they tried to hide it. There were 5 of them living in the bunkhouse, rough men with harder lives written across their faces. They nodded politely when she brought meals to the main house, but she heard them talking sometimes when they thought she couldn't hear. How long you think she'll last? City girl like that? 2 months, maybe 3? Boss is crazy thinking some mail-order bride can handle this place. Clara pretended not to hear. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached. She learned to cook on a wood stove that heated unevenly and burned everything on the left side. She mended Eli's clothes, which were more whole than fabric. She tried to bring some order to a house that had been running on survival mode for 4 years. And she tried not to think about how desperately lonely she was. Garrett barely spoke to her. Meals were silent affairs. He ate whatever she cooked without comment, then disappeared back outside. At night, she heard him moving around in his room across the hall, footsteps creaking on old floorboards, but he never knocked on her door, never asked how she was adjusting, never checked if she needed anything. Fair treatment, she reminded herself. That's what he'd promised. Not kindness, not warmth, just fairness. On the 8th day, Clara burned breakfast. She'd been up since 4:30, trying to get biscuits in the oven before Garrett came in from the morning chores. But the damned stove was running too hot again, and by the time she smelled smoke, the bottoms were charred black. She was standing over the ruined pan, fighting the urge to cry from sheer frustration, when Eli shuffled into the kitchen. He looked at the biscuits, looked at her face. "They're burned," he said. "I know they're burned," Clara snapped, then immediately felt guilty. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Pa burns everything too," Eli interrupted. "That's why we mostly eat beans." Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. "Your father's not much of a cook?" "He's terrible." Eli climbed onto a chair. "But you're better. Even the burned stuff tastes better than what he makes." It was the first kind thing anyone had said to her since she'd arrived. Clara set down the ruined pan and sat across from him. "Can I ask you something?" Eli nodded. "What was your mother like?" The boy's face went carefully blank. "Don't remember much. I was 4 when she died. I'm sorry. Pa doesn't talk about her." Eli picked at a crack in the table. "He doesn't talk about anything, really." "I noticed." "He's not mean, though," Eli added quickly, defensive. "He just doesn't know how to be different." Clara studied the small, serious boy across from her. 8 years old and already carrying the weight of a man twice his age, already protecting his father from criticism. "I'm not here to change him," she said quietly. "I'm just here to help. If you'll let me." Eli considered this. "You staying for real, or you gonna leave when it gets too hard?" The question hit harder than it should have. "I'm staying." "How do you know?" "Because I didn't come here looking for easy," Clara said. "I came here looking for honest. And as hard as this is, nobody's lying to me. Nobody's pretending I'm something I'm not. That's worth more than comfort." Eli stared at her for a long moment. Then he pushed back his chair. "Come on, I'll show you how to feed the chickens. Pa usually makes me do it, but you should probably learn." It was the first real conversation she'd had in over a week. Clara followed him outside into the bitter cold, and Eli taught her about chickens with the patient seriousness of someone who'd been doing this work his whole life. He showed her where the feed was kept, how to scatter it, how to check for eggs without getting pecked. "This one's mean," he warned, pointing at a speckled hen. "She bit Pa last week." "What did your father do?" "Threatened to turn her into soup." Eli grinned. "But he didn't. He never does." Clara laughed, surprising herself. It was the second time she'd laughed since arriving at Wind Hollow, and both times it had been because of this blunt, honest little boy. When they came back inside, Garrett was sitting at the table, staring at the burned biscuits. "They're ruined," Clara said before he could comment. "I'll make more." "Don't bother." He picked one up, broke it open, scraped off the burned bottom, and ate the rest. "Still better than what I usually make." Eli shot Clara a told-you-so look. Garrett finished the biscuit and stood. "I need to ride out to the north pasture today. Check the fences before the next snow hits. I'll be gone until dark." "All right, Clara said. He paused at the door. "Eli, you help Clara today. Show her where everything is. Answer her questions." "Yes, sir." Garrett looked at Clara like he wanted to say something else, then just nodded and left. "See?" Eli said once his father was gone. "He's not mean." "No," Clara agreed quietly. "He's just scared." Eli frowned. "Pa's not scared of anything." But Clara knew better. Garrett Hale was terrified. She'd seen it in the way he kept his distance, the way he avoided looking at her too long, the way he treated their marriage like a business arrangement he might regret. He was scared of letting anyone close enough to hurt him again. Clara understood that fear. She'd lived with a different version of it her whole life, the fear of being seen and found wanting, the fear of mattering to someone and having them decide she wasn't worth it. But she hadn't come to Wyoming to hide from fear. She'd come to survive it. That afternoon, Eli took her on a tour of the ranch. He showed her the barn, the equipment shed, the smokehouse, the root cellar. He introduced her to the horses, a big gray gelding named Smoke that Garrett rode, and a smaller mare named Copper that had belonged to his mother. "Nobody rides her anymore," Eli said quietly. "Pa won't sell her, but he won't ride her either." Clara ran her hand along Copper's neck. The mare was beautiful, russet-colored with a white blaze, but thin and clearly underworked. "Maybe I could ride her," Clara said, "if your father doesn't mind." Eli's eyes widened. "You know how to ride?" "My father taught me when I was young. I'm probably rusty, but I remember the basics." "You should ask Pa," Eli said. "He might say yes." That night at supper, Clara brought it up. Eli said there's a mare in the barn that nobody rides. Garrett's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Copper. Would you mind if I rode her? Just around the ranch. I'd like to learn the land." And Eli said, "She was my wife's horse," Garrett said flatly. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "I'm sorry," Clara said quickly. "I didn't mean—" "She needs exercise," Garrett continued, cutting her off. "And you're right. You should learn the land. Use her if you want." He said it like it didn't matter, like it was just a practical decision. But Clara saw his knuckles go white around his fork. "Thank you," she said quietly. They finished the meal in silence. Later, after Eli had gone to bed, Clara was washing dishes when Garrett came back downstairs. She heard him pause in the doorway but didn't turn around. "My first wife's name was Rebecca," he said suddenly. Clara's hands stilled in the dishwater. "She came from Boston. Educated family. She thought ranch life would be an adventure." His voice was flat, emotionless. It broke her. The isolation, the work, the cold. She hated it here. Hated me for bringing her here. She died trying to leave. Clara turned around slowly. Garrett was standing in the doorway, not looking at her, staring at some point on the far wall. "There was a blizzard," he continued. "She took Copper and tried to ride to town. Said she couldn't take another day here. I went after her, but—" He stopped. They found her 3 days later. Frozen. The silence that followed was suffocating. "That's why I don't want romance," Garrett said finally. "That's why I don't want promises I can't keep. I won't lie to you and say this life is anything except hard. And I won't pretend I'm anything except what I am." Clara dried her hands on her apron, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not Rebecca." "I know that." "Do you?" She took a step closer. "Because it seems like you're punishing me for what she couldn't handle." Garrett's jaw tightened. "I'm protecting you." "I didn't ask for protection. I asked for honesty." "You want honesty?" His voice hardened. "Fine. This ranch has killed everything soft that's ever tried to survive here. The land doesn't care if you're kind or hopeful or full of dreams. It'll break you anyway, so don't get comfortable. Don't start thinking you belong here, because the minute you do, this place will remind you that you don't." The words were meant to hurt, and they did. But Clara didn't flinch. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "I already know I don't belong here. I didn't belong in Missouri either. I've never belonged anywhere. But the difference is here I can earn my place. Here I can prove I'm worth something. Back home, I was invisible no matter what I did. At least here, the work matters." Garrett stared at her like she'd slapped him. Then he turned and walked out. Clara stood alone in the kitchen, hands shaking, heart pounding. She'd just challenged the man who held her entire future in his hands. But she'd also told him the truth, and truth was the only currency she had left. The next morning, Garrett was gone before dawn again. But when Clara went out to feed the chickens, she found Copper already saddled and waiting in the yard. Eli was grinning. "Pa said you can ride her whenever you want." Clara ran her hand along the mare's neck, throat tight. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. She swung into the saddle, awkward at first, muscles remembering motions she hadn't used in years, and rode out into the cold Wyoming morning. The wind cut through her coat like knives, and the vastness of the land made her feel small and insignificant. But for the first time since arriving, Clara felt something close to freedom. She rode for an hour, learning the boundaries of the ranch, memorizing landmarks. When she came back, Garrett was in the yard mending a fence. He looked up as she approached. "She handle all right?" "She's perfect," Clara said. Garrett nodded and went back to work. It wasn't much, but it was more than silence. Over the next 2 weeks, things shifted in small, almost imperceptible ways. Garrett started coming in for breakfast instead of skipping it entirely. He didn't talk much, but he stopped leaving before she woke. Eli opened up more, telling her stories about the ranch, about his life, about the mother he barely remembered and the father he desperately wanted to understand. And Clara started to see the ranch for what it really was, not a prison, but a place held together by sheer stubbornness and hard work. The ranch hands slowly warmed to her too. When one of them, a grizzled man named Tom who'd worked for Garrett for 10 years, got sick with fever, Clara brought him soup and medicine and sat with him until the worst passed. "You didn't have to do that," Tom said weakly. "I know," Clara replied. "But you work for this ranch, which means you're part of it, and we take care of our own." Word spread faster than wildfire. The next day, all 5 ranch hands tipped their hats when she brought lunch to the barn. One of them, a young man named Danny, even smiled. "We figured you wrong, ma'am," he said quietly. "Thought you'd be gone by now." "I'm harder to get rid of than you think," Clara said. Danny grinned. "Yes, ma'am, we're starting to see that." But the real test came when the town finally got involved. 3 weeks after Clara arrived, Garrett announced they'd be going to Sunday services. "There's a community gathering after," he explained reluctantly. "People expect us to show up, especially since you have a new wife," Clara finished. "Yeah." Eli looked worried. "The town ladies are mean, Clara. They're going to stare at you and say things." "Let them," Clara said calmly. "I've survived worse than small-town gossip." But she was nervous anyway. The church was small, wooden, and packed with people who all turned to stare the moment the Hale family walked in. Clara kept her head up, her hand steady on Eli's shoulder, and followed Garrett to a pew near the back. The whispers started immediately. "That's her? The mail-order bride? Plain-looking thing, isn't she? Poor Garrett. First Rebecca, now this." Clara ignored all of it. The service was long and uncomfortable, but she made it through without breaking. Afterward, when everyone gathered outside for the social, the wives of the wealthier ranchers circled like vultures. "Mrs. Hale," one of them said, her smile sharp as glass. "How lovely to finally meet you. I'm Dorothy Cunningham. My husband owns the Triple C Ranch." "Pleased to meet you," Clara said politely. "We were all so surprised when we heard Garrett had remarried," Dorothy continued, "and through a mail-order advertisement, no less. How modern." The other women tittered. Clara smiled blandly. "It seemed practical." "Oh, of course, practical." Dorothy's eyes gleamed. "And you're from Missouri, I hear. How are you finding Wyoming? It must be quite different." "It's colder," Clara said, "but I'm managing." "Well, ranch life isn't for everyone," another woman added. "Poor Rebecca, Garrett's first wife. She tried so hard, but in the end—" She trailed off meaningfully. Clara's hands clenched at her sides, but before she could respond, a new voice cut through the circle. "Ladies, stop circling like you're about to pick bones clean." Everyone turned. A woman in her 40s stood there, wearing a practical wool coat and an expression that could cut steel. She was Chinese, which made her stand out even more than Clara in this small Wyoming town, and she clearly didn't care. "Dr. Evelyn Wu?" She introduced herself, offering Clara her hand. "Town physician, and apparently the only person here with manners." Clara shook her hand gratefully. "Clara Hale." "I know who you are." Evelyn turned to the other women. "Dorothy, don't you have someone else to terrorize? I'm sure there's a new family in town you haven't properly destroyed yet." Dorothy's smile turned icy. "We were just welcoming Mrs. Hale to the community." "You were circling her like sharks. There's a difference." Evelyn hooked her arm through Clara's. "Come on, let's get coffee that isn't poisoned with judgment." She steered Clara away before anyone could object. "Thank you," Clara said quietly once they were out of earshot. "Don't thank me. I hate those women." Evelyn poured 2 cups of coffee from the communal pot. "They treated me the same way when I first arrived. Took me 3 years to earn their respect, and even now they only tolerate me because I'm the only doctor within 50 miles. How did you do it? Earn their respect, I mean." Evelyn smiled grimly. "I saved Dorothy Cunningham's life when she got blood poisoning. Hard to hate someone who kept you from dying." She handed Clara a cup. "But you won't have to save anyone. You just have to outlast them." "What do you mean?" "They're waiting for you to fail," Evelyn said bluntly. They want you to run back east crying, just like Rebecca did. Proves their theory that frontier life is too hard for delicate women. She snorted. But you don't look delicate to me. I'm not. Good. Because Garrett Hale needs someone strong. That man's been drowning in guilt and grief for 4 years. His son needs a mother. His ranch needs stability. And he needs someone who won't break when things get hard. Clara looked across the yard to where Garrett stood talking to other ranchers. His face unreadable. His shoulders carrying weight he'd never share. I don't know if I'm strong enough for all that, she admitted. Nobody does until they're tested, Evelyn said. But I've seen weak women, and you're not one of them. You wouldn't have come here if you were. Before Clara could respond, a commotion erupted near the churchyard. 2 ranch hands, one from the Triple C, one from Wind Hollow, were shoving each other, voices raised, fists clenched. You calling me a liar? I'm calling you a thief. Those cattle had our brand, and you know it. The crowd backed away nervously. Garrett started forward, but before he could intervene, Clara moved. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it, just walked straight into the space between 2 angry men twice her size and said in a voice that carried across the yard, "That's enough." Both men froze. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern—" The Triple C hand started. "It concerns me if you're about to start a fight that involves my husband's ranch," Clara interrupted. Her heart was hammering, but her voice stayed steady. "Now, you both have 2 choices. You can act like civilized men and settle this with words, or you can throw punches and end up in front of the sheriff explaining why you disturbed a community gathering. Which is it going to be?" The Wind Hollow hand, Danny, the young one who'd smiled at her, looked sheepish. "Sorry, ma'am, he just—" "I don't care who started it," Clara said. "I care how it ends. Shake hands or walk away. Your choice." The 2 men stared at each other. Then, grudgingly, they shook. The crowd murmured, surprised. Clara turned and walked back to Evelyn like her knees weren't shaking. "Well," Evelyn said quietly, "I think you just earned some respect." Garrett appeared beside them, his expression unreadable. "That was dangerous." "They weren't going to hurt me," Clara said. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." She met his eyes. "They work for you. They respect you. And whether they like it or not, I'm part of this ranch now. They won't touch me." Garrett stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he almost smiled. "Let's go home," he said quietly. On the ride back to the ranch, Eli chattered excitedly about how Clara had scared those big ranch hands, and how nobody else's mother would have done that, and how the Triple C hand looked like he wanted to disappear. Garrett didn't say anything, but when they reached Wind Hollow and he helped Clara down from the wagon, his hand lingered just a second longer than necessary. "You surprised me today," he said quietly. "Good surprise or bad surprise?" Clara asked, still deciding. But there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, something that looked almost like hope. That night, after Eli had gone to bed, Clara sat in the kitchen darning socks by lamplight. She heard Garrett's footsteps on the stairs and assumed he was heading to bed. Instead, he appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Can't sleep?" she asked. Thinking. Clara waited. Garrett pulled out a chair and sat across from her. For a long moment, he just watched her work. "I haven't thanked you," he said finally. "For what?" "For staying. For not running when things got hard. For—" He paused. "For not being afraid of me." Clara set down her sewing. "Should I be afraid of you?" "Most people are. I'm not easy to be around, I know that." "You're honest," Clara said. "That's not the same as difficult." "Rebecca thought I was difficult." "Rebecca wanted something you couldn't give her," Clara said gently. "I don't." Garrett's jaw tightened. "What do you want, Clara?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with 4 years of grief, 3 weeks of silence, and a future neither of them could predict. Clara chose her words carefully. "I want to be part of something that matters. I want to work hard and have it mean something. I want Eli to have a stable home, and I want you to stop waiting for me to leave." "What if I can't?" "Then I'll prove it to you," Clara said simply. "Every single day until you believe it." Garrett looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he stood, nodded once, and went upstairs. But something had shifted. Clara felt it in the air, in the silence, in the way the house settled around them. They were still strangers, still learning each other, still scared. But for the first time, they were trying. And in the harsh Wyoming winter, Trying was all they had. 2 weeks after the church incident, winter hit Wind Hollow Ranch like a physical blow. Clara woke one morning to a silence so complete it felt wrong. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and went to the window, then stopped cold. Snow had buried the world overnight, 3 feet of it, maybe more, piled against the house and covering everything in sight. The barn was barely visible through the white curtain still falling from the sky. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs to find Garrett already pulling on his heavy coat, his face grim. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad. Cattle are scattered across the north pasture. If we don't bring them in, they'll freeze." He grabbed his gloves. "I'm taking Tom and Danny. Could be gone all day, maybe longer." "What do you need me to do?" Garrett paused, looking at her like he'd expected her to complain about being left alone. "Keep the fires going. Watch Eli. If we're not back by nightfall, don't come looking for us." "Garrett, I mean it, Clara. The storm's not finished. You stay inside no matter what." Then he was gone, disappearing into the white wall of snow with 2 ranch hands who looked just as worried as he did. Eli appeared at the top of the stairs, still in his nightshirt. "Where's Pa?" "Getting the cattle," Clara said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "He'll be back soon." But soon turned into hours. Hours turned into afternoon. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it got worse. Wind screamed around the house, rattling windows and finding every crack in the walls. Clara kept the fires burning, made soup nobody ate, and watched Eli try to hide his fear. "He's done this before," the boy said, more to himself than to her. "He always comes back." "Of course he does," Clara agreed, though her own fear was a living thing in her chest. By evening, there was still no sign of Garrett or the ranch hands. The other 3 men who'd stayed behind came to the house, stamping snow off their boots, their faces serious. "We should go look for them," one of them said. "Mr. Hale said to stay put," Clara replied, though every instinct screamed at her to do exactly what they were suggesting. "Ma'am, it's been 9 hours. And going out in this storm will just mean more people lost." She kept her voice firm, even though her hands were shaking. "We wait. We keep the fires burning so they can find their way back. That's what helps them." The men didn't like it, but they nodded and returned to the bunkhouse. Night fell. The storm continued. Clara sat by the window with a lamp burning, watching the darkness, while Eli finally fell asleep on the sofa wrapped in blankets. She didn't pray. She'd stopped believing anyone was listening years ago, but she made bargains with the universe anyway. Let him come back. Let them all come back. I'll work harder, complain less, be better. Just let them come back. It was past midnight when she heard it, the sound of horses and men's voices, barely audible over the wind. Clara ran to the door and threw it open. 3 shapes materialized out of the snow, and leading them was Garrett, half frozen, barely staying upright in the saddle. "Help me get them inside," she called to the men from the bunkhouse, who came running. They got Garrett into the house first. His face was white, his lips blue, his hands so cold Clara wasn't sure he could feel them anymore. Tom and Danny were in better shape, but not by much. "Take them to the bunkhouse," Clara ordered. "Get them warm. I'll take care of Garrett." She half carried him to the chair nearest the stove, wrapped him in every blanket she could find, and forced hot coffee between his frozen lips. For a terrifying moment, she thought he might not make it. His breathing was shallow, his eyes unfocused. "Garrett," she said sharply, "stay with me. You're home. You're safe. Just stay with me." Slowly, painfully, color started returning to his face. His breathing evened out. His eyes focused on her face. "Clara," he rasped, "I'm here." "The cattle? We got them. All of them." His teeth chattered so hard he could barely speak. "Had to. Couldn't lose them." "I don't care about the cattle," Clara said fiercely. "I care about you." Garrett stared at her, and something in his expression cracked open. Then he passed out. Clara spent the next 3 hours keeping him warm, checking his breathing, changing the blankets when they got damp, and fighting down panic every time he shivered. Eli woke up and helped without being asked, bringing more wood for the fire, heating water, staying quiet and steady like a boy twice his age. By dawn, Garrett was sleeping normally, the color back in his face, the worst of the danger past. Clara finally let herself collapse into the chair beside him, exhausted and terrified and furious all at once. He'd almost died. He'd ridden out into a deadly storm and nearly didn't come back, and for what? cattle, money, pride. When he finally woke late that morning, she was still sitting there. "You look terrible," he said hoarsely. "You almost died," Claire replied flatly. "I've survived worse. That's not the point." She stood up, her hands clenched. "You have a son who needs you. You have a ranch that depends on you. You have—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. "I have what?" Garrett asked quietly. "People who care whether you come home," Clara finished. The silence that followed was heavy enough to break bones. Garrett pushed himself upright slowly, wincing. "I had to get the cattle. If we'd lost them, the ranch would have been finished. And if you died, what then? You think Eli could run this place alone? You think I could?" Claire's voice shook. "You don't get to be reckless with your life anymore, Garrett. It's not just yours." He stared at her like he'd never considered that before. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I didn't think—" "No, you didn't." Clara grabbed the coffee pot and poured him a cup with shaking hands. "Drink this, and next time there's a storm, we figure out a plan that doesn't involve you freezing to death." Garrett took the cup, his fingers brushing hers. "Next time," he said quietly, "I'll be more careful." It wasn't a promise exactly, but it was close enough. The storm trapped them inside for 3 more days. Snow piled higher, wind screamed louder, and the world outside became a frozen wasteland. But inside the house, something shifted. Garrett was still recovering, moving slowly, coughing when the cold air hit his lungs too hard. Clara forced him to rest, which he hated, and Eli took shameless advantage of having both parents stuck in the house by demanding stories and card games and attention. On the second day of being trapped inside, they were playing cards at the kitchen table when Eli asked, "Pa, why don't you ever talk about Ma?" Garrett's hand froze mid-deal. Clara held her breath. "What do you want to know?" Garrett asked carefully. "What was she like? Really like, not just she was nice or whatever people say." Garrett set down the cards. For a long moment, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Your mother was smart, educated. She read more books than anyone I ever met. She could play piano, speak French, and she had opinions about everything." He paused. "She was also miserable here." Eli flinched. Clara wanted to interrupt, to protect the boy from whatever was coming, but Garrett kept going. She hated the ranch, hated the isolation. She missed the city, her family, her old life. "I thought she'd adjust, but she never did, and I was too stubborn to see how much she was suffering." His voice went rough. "By the time I realized it was too late, she'd already decided to leave." "But she died before she could," Eli said quietly. "Yeah." Garrett looked at his son. "I loved her, Eli, but love wasn't enough to make her happy here, and I've spent 4 years wondering if I killed her by bringing her to a place she couldn't survive." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Clara spoke before she could stop herself. "You didn't kill her, Garrett. She made a choice to leave during a blizzard. That was her decision, not yours." Garrett turned to look at her, his eyes dark. "You don't know." "I know she was an adult," Clara interrupted. "I know she could have waited for better weather. I know she chose to ride out during a storm, and that's not your fault." "I should have seen how bad it was." "You should have, yes. But she should have told you instead of running. You both made mistakes." Clara's voice softened. "But you can't carry all the blame forever, Garrett. It's going to crush you." Eli was watching them both with wide eyes. Garrett scrubbed a hand over his face. "How do you know so much about guilt?" "Because I spent 23 years feeling guilty for not being what my family wanted me to be," Clara said. "For not being pretty enough, charming enough, worth loving. And then I came here and realized I was carrying blame that was never mine to carry." "That's different." "It's not." She leaned forward. "You can't control other people's choices, Garrett. You can only control your own. Rebecca chose to leave during a storm. That was her decision. You chose to go after her. That was yours. And now you get to choose whether you spend the rest of your life punishing yourself or whether you let yourself try again." Garrett stared at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Eli. "Your mother loved you. Never doubt that. But she couldn't love this life. And that's the truth." Eli nodded slowly, processing. "Do you love it here?" he asked Clara suddenly. Clara considered the question honestly. "I love the work. I love knowing what I do matters. I love that nobody here expects me to be something I'm not." She glanced at Garrett. And I'm starting to care about the people. Something flickered in Garrett's eyes. That night after Eli had gone to bed, Garrett found Clara in the kitchen cleaning up. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for what you said earlier about Rebecca. I meant it." "I know." He moved closer. "You're nothing like her, you know. You're stronger, tougher. You don't break when things get hard." "I break," Clara said, "just not where people can see." Garrett's hand came up like he was going to touch her face, then stopped. "I'm glad you're here, Clara. I haven't said that, but I am." Her heart did something complicated in her chest. "I'm glad I'm here too." They stood in the quiet kitchen, close enough to touch, and for the first time since Clara had arrived, the distance between them felt like something they could cross. Then Garrett stepped back. "Get some sleep. Storm should break tomorrow." He was gone before she could respond. But Clara went to bed that night feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The storm broke 2 days later, leaving Wind Hollow Ranch buried under 4 feet of snow, but miraculously intact. The cattle had survived. The men had survived. And Garrett recovered fully, though Clara caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Life returned to normal, or what passed for normal on a Wyoming ranch in winter. Clara continued learning, working, proving herself day by day. The town stopped whispering quite so loudly when she showed up. The ranch hands started asking her opinion on things. Eli called her Ma for the first time, and then looked terrified, like he'd made a mistake. "It's all right," Clara told him quietly. "You can call me whatever feels right." He called her Ma from then on. Then 6 weeks after the blizzard, trouble arrived in the form of a well-dressed stranger. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw the expensive buggy rolling up to the house. The man who climbed out wore a suit that probably cost more than the ranch made in a month, and his smile was the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning," he called pleasantly. "I'm looking for Garrett Hale." "He's out working," Clara replied, setting down the laundry basket. "Can I help you?" "You must be the new Mrs. Hale." The man tipped his hat. "Silas Mercer. I own the Triple C Ranch and a few others in the territory." Clara's stomach went cold. She'd heard about Silas Mercer. Everyone had. He was the richest man in 3 counties, owned half the land around them, and had a reputation for getting what he wanted no matter who he crushed in the process. "What can I do for you, Mr. Mercer?" "I came to make your husband an offer," Mercer said smoothly. "I'm interested in purchasing Wind Hollow Ranch. I'm prepared to be very generous. The ranch isn't for sale." Mercer's smile didn't waver. "Perhaps we should let Mr. Hale make that decision." "He already has," Clara said. "This ranch has been in his family for 12 years. He's not selling." "Things change, Mrs. Hale. Financial pressures mount. A man with a family to support might reconsider." Mercer looked around the property, his gaze calculating. "Especially a man carrying as much debt as your husband." Clara kept her face blank, but her mind raced. Debt? Garrett hadn't mentioned debt. "I'll let my husband know you stopped by," she said evenly. "Please do, and tell him I'm patient." Mercer climbed back into his buggy, but not infinitely so. He drove away, leaving Clara standing in the yard with the dread pooling in her stomach. When Garrett came home that evening, she told him about the visit. His face went hard as stone. "What did you tell him?" "That the ranch isn't for sale." "Good." Garrett poured himself coffee with shaking hands. "Because it's not." "Garrett." Clara chose her words carefully. "He mentioned debt." Garrett's jaw tightened. "It's under control." "How much debt?" Clara, how much? He slammed the cup down. "Enough that Mercer thinks he can wait me out. Enough that one bad season could finish us." He turned to face her. "I've been paying it down slowly, but the ranch doesn't make enough to clear it quickly. And Mercer knows it." "Why does he want Wind Hollow?" "Water rights," Garrett said bitterly. "We sit on the best river access in the territory. And there's timber in the North Hills that's worth a fortune. He's been circling for years, waiting for me to fail." "What happens if you can't pay?" "The bank forecloses. Mercer buys the property at auction for half what it's worth. And we lose everything." Clara's mind raced, sorting through possibilities. "How long do we have?" "Until spring, maybe summer if I can negotiate an extension." Garrett looked exhausted. "But Mercer's right. One bad season and we're finished." "Then we make sure the season isn't bad," Clara said firmly. Garrett almost smiled. It's not that simple. Nothing about this life is simple, Clara replied, but we figure it out anyway. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed thinking about Mercer's polished smile, about Garrett's fear, about Eli losing the only home he'd ever known, about everything they'd built, everything they were still building, getting ripped away because of money. By morning, she'd made a decision. She rode into town alone, found Dr. Evelyn Wu's office, and knocked. "Clara?" Evelyn looked surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I need your help," Clara said, "and I need you to tell me the truth about something." They sat in Evelyn's office, and Clara explained everything. Mercer's visit, the debt, the threat hanging over the ranch. "Does Garrett have any way out of this?" Clara asked. Evelyn's expression was grim. "Mercer's been trying to buy Wind Hollow for years. He's patient, rich, and ruthless. If Garrett can't pay the debt, the bank will foreclose, and Mercer owns the bank." "Of course he does," Clara muttered. "But," Evelyn continued slowly, "there might be another option." "What?" "The Territorial Land Office keeps records of all property transactions and surveys. If Garrett can prove his water rights are legally sound and his timber claims are filed correctly, Mercer can't touch them even if he buys the property. The rights would transfer separately." Clara's mind caught fire. "So if we could prove the water and timber rights are separate from the land itself, Mercer loses his main reason for wanting the property," Evelyn finished, "and those rights could be leased separately to cover the debt. Where are these records kept?" "Territorial office, 3 towns over, but Clara sees." Evelyn's face was serious. "Mercer has lawyers, he has money, he has influence. Even if you find the records, he'll fight you." "Let him fight," Clara said. She rode home and found Garrett in the barn. "We're going to the Territorial office," she announced. Garrett looked up from the harness he was mending. "What?" "The land office. 3 towns over. We're going to pull every record they have on Wind Hollow Ranch. Water rights, timber claims, property surveys, everything." "Clara, I've looked at those records." "Then we'll look again," Clara interrupted, "with fresh eyes, because there has to be something Mercer's missed. Some loophole, some legal protection, something that proves this ranch is worth more than he's offering and can't be touched even if the debt isn't paid." Garrett stared at her. "You think you can outthink Silas Mercer?" "I think I'm desperate enough to try," Clara said, "and I think you're too scared of losing to see clearly. So let me look. Let me help. That's what partners do." The word hung between them. Partners. Not employer and employee, not business arrangement. Partners. Garrett's expression shifted. "All right, we leave tomorrow." They rode out the next morning before dawn, pushing hard to reach the Territorial office while it was still open. The clerk looked bored until Clara started requesting documents, then looked impressed when she kept going. Water rights dating back 15 years, timber surveys, flood records showing historical river boundaries, property transfers, original land grants. She and Garrett spread everything across a table in the records room and started reading. Hours passed. Clara's eyes burned. Her back ached. But she kept going, cross-referencing dates and names and legal descriptions until the words blurred together. Then she found it. "Garrett," she said quietly, "look at this." She pointed to a water rights filing from 1869, 2 years before Garrett bought the property. The previous owner had filed a claim that extended the water access beyond what the current deed showed. "That filing was never updated," Clara said, her heart racing. "Which means the water rights are actually broader than anyone thinks. If we can prove this is still valid." "Mercer's been negotiating based on incomplete information," Garrett finished, his eyes widening. "He doesn't know the full extent of the water access." They kept digging. 2 hours later, they found a second document, a timber survey that showed the northern hills contained twice as much harvestable lumber as the current assessment indicated. Clara sat back, her mind racing. If we can prove these filings are still legally valid, the ranch is worth significantly more than the debt. We could lease the timber rights without selling the land, pay off the bank, and keep Mercer from ever getting control. Garrett was staring at her like she'd performed magic. "How did you—" "I spent my entire life being invisible," Clara said. "You learn to notice things other people miss." They paid the clerk to make copies of everything, then rode back to Wind Hollow as fast as the horses could carry them. But when they arrived, smoke was rising from the ranch. Garrett spurred his horse forward, Clara right behind him. The main barn was on fire. Flames tore through the old wood, thick smoke billowing into the sky. The ranch hands were already fighting it, forming a water line from the well, but it was clear they were losing. "Get Eli to safety!" Garrett shouted to Clara, already running toward the barn. Clara found Eli with one of the hands, terrified but unhurt. She made sure he was secure, then ran to join the water line. They fought the fire for 3 hours. By the time they got it under control, the barn was a smoking ruin and everyone was covered in soot and ash. Garrett stood staring at the destruction, his face unreadable. Tom approached carefully. "Boss, I checked the site. Fire started in 3 different places." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying it was set deliberately." The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara felt cold despite the heat still radiating from the ruined barn. "Mercer." "We don't know that," Tom said quickly. "Yes, we do," Garrett said flatly. "This is how he operates. Apply pressure, create problems, make it impossible to keep going." "What do we do?" Danny asked. Garrett looked at Clara. She saw the fear in his eyes, not fear of the fire or Mercer or even losing the ranch. Fear of losing her. Fear that this would be too much, that she'd finally break and leave like Rebecca had. Clara stepped forward and took his hand. "We rebuild," she said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We file the water rights claim. We prove the timber value. We force Mercer to negotiate fairly, and we don't let him win." "Clara." Garrett's voice cracked. "I'm not leaving," she said fiercely. "I'm not Rebecca. I don't run when things get hard. This is my home too now, Garrett, and I'll fight for it just as hard as you will." Something broke in Garrett's expression, years of fear and guilt and loneliness finally cracking open. He pulled her close and held her like she was the only solid thing in a world falling apart. And Clara held him back, equally desperate, equally determined. Around them, the ranch hands pretended not to notice. That night, after Eli was asleep and the fires were out and the exhaustion had settled into their bones, Garrett found Clara on the porch. "I can't ask you to fight this battle," he said quietly. "You're not asking. I'm choosing." Clara looked at him. "You think I came to Wyoming just to survive? I came here to matter, to be part of something real. And this ranch, this family, matters more than anything I've ever had. If we lose, then we lose together," Clara interrupted. "But we won't lose, because I found something in those records that Mercer doesn't know about. And tomorrow, we're going to use it." Garrett stared at her for a long moment. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle or romantic or anything like the fairy tales Clara had read as a girl. It was desperate and honest and full of fear and hope and everything they'd been too scared to say. When they finally pulled apart, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said roughly. "I didn't want to. I tried not to. But I do." Clara's eyes burned. "I love you too, even though you're stubborn and scared and terrible at expressing emotion." He almost laughed. "We're a mess." "Yes," Clara agreed, "but we're a mess together." They stood on the porch of Wind Hollow Ranch, surrounded by destruction and debt and impossible odds, and held each other like they could face anything as long as they didn't let go. And somewhere in the darkness, Silas Mercer had no idea that the plain mail-order bride he'd dismissed had just become the most dangerous woman in Wyoming. The morning after the fire, Clara woke before dawn with a plan forming in her mind. She dressed quickly and found Garrett already in the kitchen, staring at coffee he hadn't touched. "We need a lawyer," she said without preamble. Garrett looked up. "Lawyers cost money we don't have. Then we find one who will work for a percentage of what we save." Clara poured herself coffee and sat across from him. "Those documents we found prove the ranch is worth more than Mercer thinks, but we need someone who knows territorial law to make it stick." "And you think a lawyer will go up against Silas Mercer on a percentage?" "I think a smart lawyer will see an opportunity," Clara said. "Mercer's been buying up ranches for years. If we beat him in court, we set a precedent. Other ranchers could use the same strategy to protect their land. That's worth something." Garrett studied her with something close to awe. "When did you become a strategist?" "I've always been one. Nobody ever asked my opinion before." She set down her cup. "Dr. Wu mentioned there's a lawyer in Cheyenne, young, hungry, looking to make a name for himself. We should talk to him." That's a 3-day ride. Then we leave today. Garrett shook his head slowly. Mercer just burned down our barn. If we both leave, he might try something worse. Clara hadn't thought of that. Her mind raced through possibilities. What if I go alone? Absolutely not. Garrett, you're not riding to Cheyenne alone, he said flatly. It's dangerous country, and Mercer's proven he's willing to play dirty. Then come with me. Leave Tom in charge. Bring Eli if you have to. I can't leave the ranch for 3 days right now. We're behind on winter preparations because of the fire, and... He stopped, frustration evident on his face. Clara understood. He was trapped between protecting what they had and fighting for their future. All right, new plan. I'll take Tom with me. You stay here with Danny and the others. We'll be back in a week. Clara, I don't like this. I don't either, but we're running out of time. She reached across the table and took his hand. Trust me. I can do this. Garrett's fingers tightened around hers. I know you can. That's not what scares me. What does? Losing you, he said quietly. Mercer's dangerous. If he finds out you're trying to outmaneuver him. He already knows I'm not backing down, Clara interrupted. I made that clear when I threw him off our property. This doesn't change anything, except now I'm taking the fight to him instead of waiting for him to come to us. Garrett looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Clara's expression stopped him. He'd learned over the past months that when she set her mind to something, she didn't quit. Take Tom and Danny both, he said finally, and a rifle. I don't know how to shoot. Then I'm teaching you before you leave. An hour later, Clara stood in the yard behind the house with a rifle in her hands while Garrett showed her how to load, aim, and fire. The first shot nearly knocked her backward, and the noise scared her more than she wanted to admit. But by the 10th shot, she was hitting the target more often than not. You're a natural, Tom said, watching from the fence. I'm terrified, Clara corrected. That's smart, Garrett said. Scared people are careful. Careful people survive. He took the rifle and checked it over. But you're also steady. That matters more than being fearless. They left the next morning, Clara, Tom, and Danny, with 3 horses, supplies for a week, and copies of every document they'd pulled from the territorial office. Eli hugged Clara so hard she could barely breathe. You're coming back, right? He asked, his voice small. I promise, Clara said. I'm just going to talk to a lawyer and come right back. Ma always said she was coming back too. The words hit like a physical blow. Clara crouched down to his level. Eli, look at me. I'm not your mother. I'm not running away from anything. I'm fighting for this ranch, for your father, for you. That means I have to leave for a few days. But I will come back. Do you believe me? Eli studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Garrett pulled her aside before she mounted Copper. Be careful. I will. I'm serious, Clara. If anything feels wrong, if Mercer or his men show up, you run. Don't try to be brave. I'll be smart, Clara said. There's a difference. He kissed her then, in front of Tom and Danny and Eli and everyone, like he didn't care who saw. Come back to me. Always, Clara promised. The ride to Cheyenne took 2.5 days of hard travel. They pushed through cold that bit through their coats, across landscape that was beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Tom and Danny traded off scouting ahead, watching for trouble. But the journey stayed quiet. Too quiet, Clara thought, like the calm before something terrible. They reached Cheyenne on the 3rd afternoon and found the lawyer's office above a dry goods store. The sign read, James Montgomery, Attorney at Law, in fading paint. Clara climbed the narrow stairs and knocked. The man who answered was younger than she expected, maybe 30, with sharp eyes and a rumpled suit that had seen better days. Can I help you? Mr. Montgomery, my name is Clara Hale. I need someone willing to fight Silas Mercer in territorial court. Montgomery's eyebrows shot up. Come in. His office was small and cluttered with law books and case files. Clara laid out everything, the debt, the water rights documents, the timber survey, the fire, Mercer's threats. Montgomery listened without interrupting, taking notes, his expression growing more focused with every detail. When Clara finished, he sat back and whistled. You've got a case. A good one, actually. These water rights filings are solid, and if the timber survey holds up, Wind Hollow's worth triple what Mercer's been offering. Can you win? Against Mercer? Montgomery smiled grimly. He's got 3 lawyers on retainer, all meaner than rattlesnakes. But they're used to intimidating people into settling. They're not used to someone who's done their homework. He looked at the documents again. I'll take the case for 20% of whatever we save or earn from the timber lease. 15%, Clara countered. Montgomery laughed. You negotiate like someone who grew up doing business. I negotiate like someone who's got everything to lose, Clara said. 15% and you start immediately. Deal. He offered his hand. When's the bank deadline? June 1st? That gives us 4 months to file the claims, get them validated, and set up the timber lease. Montgomery started making notes. It's tight, but doable. I'll need to visit the ranch, survey the timber myself, and interview witnesses about the fire. When can you start? Tomorrow. I'll ride back with you. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. They had a chance. A real chance. That night, they stayed at a boarding house in Cheyenne. Clara lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about Garrett and Eli back at the ranch, hoping they were safe, hoping she'd made the right choice coming here. She must have finally fallen asleep because she woke to Tom pounding on her door. Mrs. Hale, we've got a problem. Clara threw on her coat and opened the door. What's wrong? Danny just got back from the telegraph office. There's a message from the ranch. Mercer showed up yesterday demanding to speak to Garrett. When Garrett refused to sell, Mercer threatened to call in the bank debt early. Clara's blood went cold. He can't do that. He can if he owns the bank, Tom said grimly. When? Message didn't say, but if Mercer's making moves this fast, he knows we're up to something. Clara's mind raced. They needed to get back to the ranch immediately, but they also needed Montgomery to formalize the legal claims. If they left now, they'd lose days of preparation. If they stayed, Mercer might force Garrett into a corner. Get Montgomery, she decided. Tell him we're leaving in an hour. He can review documents on the road. They rode out before sunrise, pushing the horses harder than was safe. Montgomery kept up without complaint, reading through papers while riding, asking sharp questions about property boundaries and water access. If we can prove the water rights extend to the eastern ridge, the property controls irrigation for half the valley, he said, excitement building in his voice. Mercer doesn't just want this ranch for timber. He wants water monopoly. Can we stop him? Clara asked. If we file fast enough, yes. But Mrs. Hale, Montgomery's expression turned serious. Once we file these claims, Mercer's going to know exactly what we're doing. He'll fight dirty, dirtier than burning a barn. Let him fight, Clara said. We'll fight back. They made it back to Wind Hollow in 2 days instead of 3, arriving exhausted and saddle-sore. Garrett met them in the yard, relief and fear warring on his face. Thank God you're back, he said, pulling Clara into a brief, fierce embrace. Mercer's been circling like a vulture. He sent men to inspect the property yesterday, said the bank wants an updated assessment. That's a lie, Montgomery said, climbing down from his horse. James Montgomery, attorney. And what Mercer's doing is intimidation, not legal procedure. Garrett looked at Clara. You got him to come? I got him to fight, Clara corrected. Now show him the timber. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Montgomery surveyed the northern hills with Garrett, documenting every harvestable tree. Clara worked with him to cross-reference the historical filings with current property lines. Tom and Danny kept watch for Mercer's men, and Eli, scared but trying to hide it, stayed close to Clara like a shadow. Is Mr. Mercer going to take our ranch? He asked one night while she was making dinner. Clara crouched down beside him. Not if I can help it. But he's rich, and we're not. He's rich, Clara agreed, but we're smarter, and we have something he'll never understand. What? We're fighting for our home. He's just fighting for profit. Clara touched his cheek gently. Never underestimate someone who has everything to lose, Eli. They'll fight harder than someone who's just greedy. The boy thought about that. You're scary when you're determined. You know that? Clara smiled. Good. On the 4th day, Montgomery announced the claims were ready to file. But once we submit these documents, Mercer will know what we're doing within hours, maybe less. How fast can you file? Garrett asked. I can ride to the land office tomorrow and have everything submitted by end of business. Do it, Clara said. Clara, Garrett pulled her aside after Montgomery left to prepare the documents. Once we do this, there's no going back. Mercer will come at us with everything he's got. I know. The barn was just a warning. Next time it could be the house. Or worse. His hands gripped her shoulders. I can't lose you. If something happened to you because of this, Nothing's going to happen to me, Clara interrupted. Because we're going to win this, Garrett. Those claims are legal. The timber lease will clear the debt. Mercer has no grounds to take this ranch. He doesn't need grounds. He has money and power, and we have the law on our side, Clara said firmly. We have documents he doesn't know about. We have a lawyer who's hungry enough to beat him, and we have each other. She took his face in her hands. Trust me. Please. Garrett searched her eyes, then nodded slowly. I trust you. I'm just scared. Me too, Clara admitted. But I'm more angry than scared, and that's going to get us through this. Montgomery rode out the next morning with the claims. The waiting was excruciating. Clara tried to keep busy, cooking, cleaning, helping with ranch work, but her mind kept spinning through possibilities, imagining Mercer's response, preparing for the fight ahead. 2 days later, Mercer himself showed up. Clara saw the expensive buggy rolling toward the house and called for Garrett. They met Mercer in the yard together, a united front. Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale. Mercer's smile was cold. I hear you've been making some interesting legal filings. Public record, Garrett said shortly. Indeed, water rights expansion, timber surveys, very thorough. Mercer's eyes shifted to Clara. Your wife's been busy. My wife's been protecting our property, Garrett said. Interesting. Mercer stepped closer. Because that timber you're planning to lease? I've already negotiated contracts with the logging companies in the territory. They won't work with you. Clara felt ice in her stomach but kept her voice steady. Then we'll find companies outside the territory. You could try, Mercer agreed, but transportation costs would eat any profit. And the banks that would normally finance such an operation? I have relationships with all of them. His smile widened. You've made a clever move, Mrs. Hale, but you're playing a game you can't win. We'll see, Clara said. Mercer's expression hardened. I came here to make one final offer. I'll pay off your debt directly, clear the bank entirely, and give you $20,000 for the property. That's more than fair. And the water rights, Garrett asked, would transfer to me, naturally. No deal, Clara said immediately. Mercer ignored her, speaking directly to Garrett. Think carefully, Mr. Hale. Your wife may not understand the position you're in, but you do. Winter's coming. You've got a son to protect, a family to feed. Pride won't keep them warm when you've lost everything. Garrett's jaw tightened. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually consider it. Then he stepped forward, putting himself between Clara and Mercer. My wife understands our position perfectly. Better than you do, actually. The answer's no. It'll stay no. Now get off my property. Mercer's mask of civility cracked. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Garrett said. But it's my mistake to make. And what about your wife? Your son? When this all falls apart and you lose everything, how will you look them in the eye and tell them you chose pride over their security? I'm choosing principle, Garrett said quietly. Something you wouldn't understand. Mercer's eyes went flat and dangerous. You'll regret this. He climbed back into his buggy and left, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. Clara waited until he was out of sight, then let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That went well. Garrett almost laughed. We just declared war on the richest man in Wyoming. Good, Clara said. I'm tired of being polite. That night, Garrett called a meeting with all the ranch hands. They gathered in the rebuilt barn, still smelling of fresh wood and determination, and he laid out the situation honestly. Mercer's going to fight us, Garrett said. That means this ranch might become a target. I won't blame any man who wants to leave, but if you stay, I need to know you're committed. The men looked at each other, then Tom spoke up. Boss, we've all worked ranches before. Most of us have worked for men like Mercer. He treats his hands like equipment, use them up and replace them. You treat us like people. He glanced at Clara. And your wife treats us like family. We're staying. The others nodded in agreement. Then we dig in, Garrett said. We protect this property. We watch for trouble. And we don't give Mercer an inch. The next week brought a series of smaller attacks. Poisoned water troughs that killed 3 cattle, cut fences that let livestock scatter, mysterious equipment failures that cost time and money. Nothing they could prove was Mercer, but everyone knew. Clara documented everything, every incident, every cost, every suspicion. Montgomery said it would help build their case if it came to court. Then the bank made its move. A letter arrived demanding immediate payment of the full debt. Not in June as originally agreed, but within 30 days. They can't do this, Clara said, staring at the notice. They just did, Montgomery replied grimly. He'd been staying at the ranch, working on their legal strategy. Mercer must have pressured them, or bought the debt outright. Can we fight it? We can try to get an injunction, but that takes time we don't have. Garrett sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. It's over. Even if we win the water rights case, we can't pay the full debt in 30 days. Mercer won. No, Clara said sharply. He hasn't won. We just need to think differently. Clara, there's no solution. There's always a solution, Clara interrupted. We just haven't found it yet. She spent the entire night going through the documents again, searching for something they'd missed. Her eyes burned, her head ached. But she kept reading. And finally, at 3 a.m, she found it. A clause in the original water rights filing that allowed for emergency leasing in cases of financial hardship. If they could prove the ranch was under duress, they could lease the water rights immediately, not just the timber. Clara ran to wake Garrett and Montgomery. Look at this, she said, spreading the document on the table. Section 12, subsection C. Emergency provisions for water access leasing. Montgomery grabbed the paper, reading quickly. His eyes widened. This could work. If we can prove financial hardship and prove Mercer's been interfering with the ranch operations. We have documentation of every attack, Clara interrupted. The poisoned cattle, the cut fences, all of it. It's circumstantial, Montgomery warned. We can't prove Mercer ordered any of it. We don't need to prove it, Clara said, her mind racing. We just need to prove the ranch is under financial duress due to external interference. That triggers the emergency clause. We can lease the water rights to the neighboring ranches immediately, the ones that border our property and need irrigation access. Garrett stared at her. You want to lease our water to our neighbors? I want to generate immediate income that pays off the debt before Mercer can foreclose, Clara said. The neighbors need water access for summer irrigation. We need money now. It's a temporary lease, 5 years, with option to renew. They get reliable water. We get enough to clear the debt and tell Mercer to go to hell. Montgomery was nodding, excitement building on his face. It's brilliant. Risky, but brilliant. I'll need to contact the neighboring ranchers immediately. Draft lease agreements. I'll do it, Clara said. Both men stared at her. I'll talk to the ranchers, she repeated. They know me from town. They've seen me stand up to Mercer, and most of them hate him as much as we do. She looked at Garrett. Trust me to do this. Garrett looked like he wanted to argue. Then he nodded. Tom and Danny go with you. Agreed. The next day, Clara rode out to every neighboring ranch within 20 miles. Most of the ranchers were skeptical at first. Leasing water rights was unusual, and siding with the Hales meant making an enemy of Mercer. But Clara didn't just pitch them a business deal. She pitched them independence. Mercer wants to control all the water in this valley, she told them. If he gets Wind Hollow, he controls irrigation, which means he controls your ranches too. But if we lease you guaranteed water access now, he can't touch you. You get security. We get to keep our ranch. And Mercer loses his monopoly. One by one, the ranchers agreed. By the end of the week, Clara had secured enough lease agreements to generate triple the money they needed to pay off the debt. When she rode back to Wind Hollow and told Garrett, he pulled her off her horse and kissed her in front of everyone. You did it, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You actually did it. We did it, Clara corrected. Now let's go tell Mercer he lost. They didn't have to. 2 days later, Mercer himself showed up at the ranch, alone this time, without his usual entourage. Clara was on the porch when he arrived. Garrett was out with the hands, but she didn't move to call him. She just stood there, rifle resting against the porch railing within easy reach. Mercer climbed down from his buggy slowly. Mrs. Hale. Mr. Mercer, I hear you've been busy. I have a ranch to run. Mercer's smile was gone. In its place was something colder, more dangerous. You've made a very foolish enemy. You made an enemy of me first, Clara replied calmly. I just finished what you started. Those water leases won't hold up. They're legal, filed properly, and backed by contracts signed by 6 different ranchers who are tired of you bullying them. Clara took a step closer to the rifle. You lost, Mr. Mercer. Accept it with whatever grace you have left. Mercer's face went red. You think you've won? You think some water leases and legal paperwork make you safe? He moved toward the porch. I could crush you. I could make your lives so miserable you'd beg to sell me this ranch for pennies. Clara picked up the rifle, not aiming it at him, just holding it. Get off my property! Or what? You'll shoot me? Mercer laughed bitterly. You're not a killer, Mrs. Hale. No, Clara agreed, raising the rifle to point directly at his chest. But I'm a woman protecting her home, and in Wyoming territory, that gives me every legal right to put a bullet in anyone threatening my family. For the first time since she'd met him, Silas Mercer looked uncertain. Clara's hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. I said get off my land. Mercer stared at her for one long, tense moment. Then he turned, climbed back into his buggy, and drove away. Clara didn't lower the rifle until he was completely out of sight. Then her knees buckled and she sat down hard on the porch steps, shaking. That's where Garrett found her 10 minutes later. He'd seen Mercer leaving and come running. What happened? He demanded. I threatened to shoot him, Clara said, her voice unsteady. You what? He threatened us. I told him to leave. He didn't. So I picked up the rifle and aimed it at his chest and told him to get off our land. She looked up at Garrett. I think he believed me. Garrett stared at her, then started laughing. Not his usual quiet chuckle, but real laughter that shook his whole body. What's so funny? Clara asked. You, standing here threatening the richest man in Wyoming with a rifle. He pulled her to her feet and kissed her. You're the most terrifying woman I've ever met, Clara Hale, and I love you more than I thought possible. Clara kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it, the fear, the triumph, the desperate love that had grown between them despite every obstacle. When they finally pulled apart, Eli was standing in the doorway, eyes wide. Did you really point a gun at Mr. Mercer? Yes, Clara admitted. That's amazing, Eli breathed. Can you teach me to shoot like that? Absolutely not, Garrett and Clara said simultaneously. But that night, after Eli had gone to bed and the ranch was quiet, Garrett found Clara in their bedroom. Not the separate rooms they'd maintained for months, their bedroom. She'd moved her things into his room 3 weeks ago, and neither of them had discussed it. It just happened. He pulled her close. I need to tell you something. What? I was wrong, Garrett said quietly, about a lot of things. I thought keeping my distance would protect me from getting hurt again. I thought treating our marriage like a business arrangement would keep it safe. But you changed everything. Clara's throat tightened. Garrett, let me finish, he interrupted gently. You came here asking for honesty and fair treatment, and you gave me so much more than that. You gave me hope. You gave Eli a mother. You gave this ranch a future. His voice roughened. You gave me a reason to stop hiding from life. You did the same for me, Clara whispered. I was invisible for 23 years. You made me matter. You always mattered, Garrett said fiercely. Your family was just too blind to see it. They held each other in the quiet darkness of their home, the home they'd fought for, bled for, and refused to surrender. Outside, Wyoming wind howled across the valley. Winter was coming again. There would be more storms, more hardships, more battles to fight. But Clara and Garrett Hale had learned something Silas Mercer never understood. Love wasn't weakness. It was the strongest thing they had, and together they were unstoppable. The water lease money arrived in March, delivered by bank courier in a locked box that represented everything Clara and Garrett had fought for. They sat at the kitchen table counting it twice, then 3 times, unable to quite believe it was real. It's enough, Garrett said finally, his voice hoarse. More than enough to clear the debt and have operating capital for the year. Clara stared at the neat stacks of bills. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible in Missouri, cooking meals for people who didn't see her. Now she was looking at money she'd earned, not through inheritance or luck, but through sheer determination and refusing to quit when everything said she should. We need to pay the bank immediately, she said, before Mercer tries anything else. They rode into town the next morning with Montgomery, the money secured in saddlebags, and walked into the bank like they owned it. The banker, a nervous man named Whitmore, who'd clearly been getting pressure from Mercer, looked relieved when Garrett laid out the full payment. This clears the debt entirely, Garrett said. I want documentation. Today. Whitmore counted the money with shaking hands, then prepared the papers. Mr. Mercer's not going to be happy about this. Mr. Mercer can go to hell, Clara said pleasantly. Montgomery grinned. Garrett squeezed her hand under the table. They walked out of the bank 30 minutes later as the legal owners of Wind Hollow Ranch, free and clear. No debt, no threats, no more looking over their shoulders waiting for the axe to fall. "We did it," Garrett said quietly, standing on the wooden sidewalk in the cold March sunlight. "We did," Clara agreed. Then Garrett pulled her close and kissed her right there on Main Street, in front of the bank and the general store and half the town. Clara heard gasps and whispers, but she didn't care. Let them talk. Let them see that the plain mail-order bride had not only survived, but won. When they finally pulled apart, Dr. Evelyn Wu was standing nearby, smiling. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "I heard about the water leases. Brilliant strategy." "Thank you," Clara said. "For everything. Your advice at the church social was nothing compared to what you did yourself," Evelyn interrupted. "You stood up to Mercer when half the territory was too scared to breathe wrong around him. That takes real courage." "Or stupidity," Clara said. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Evelyn glanced toward the other end of town where Mercer's office stood. "He's going to try something else, you know. Men like him don't accept defeat gracefully." "Let him try," Garrett said. "We're ready." But weeks passed and Mercer stayed quiet. Too quiet. The ranch settled into a new rhythm, profitable, stable, and almost peaceful. The water leases provided steady income. The timber contracts Montgomery negotiated brought in additional revenue. And for the first time in years, Garrett wasn't drowning in debt and fear. Clara threw herself into making Wind Hollow Ranch not just functional, but good. She started a vegetable garden that actually produced food. She organized the household properly, creating systems that worked instead of just surviving day to day. She even convinced Garrett to let her handle the ranch books, discovering she had a talent for numbers and organization that surprised them both. "You should have been running businesses in Missouri," Garrett said one night, watching her balance the accounts with frightening efficiency. "Nobody in Missouri would have let me near their business ledgers," Clara replied. "Women don't do that kind of work there." "Their loss," Garrett said. "Our gain." The town's attitude shifted too. The women who'd whispered about the plain mail-order bride now asked Claire's advice about managing household budgets and dealing with difficult neighbors. The ranchers who'd leased water rights started consulting her on contracts and land management. Even Dorothy Cunningham, who'd been so cruel at that first church social, grudgingly acknowledged Claire's intelligence. "You're quite clever, Mrs. Hale," she said one Sunday after services. "For someone so unassuming." It was probably the closest thing to a compliment Clara would ever get from her. Eli flourished too. The scared, serious boy who'd greeted Clara that first day started acting like an actual child, laughing, playing, causing minor trouble the way 8-year-olds were supposed to. He started calling Clara Ma without hesitation, and one night he told Garrett he barely remembered his first mother anymore. "Is that bad?" Eli asked, worried. Garrett pulled him close. "No, son. It's normal. Your first mother loved you, but Clara loves you too. You're allowed to have both in your heart." "Do you still love Ma? The first one, I mean?" Garrett looked at Clara, who was pretending not to listen while doing dishes. "I loved who she was, but I love who Clara is more. Does that make sense?" "I think so," Eli said. "It's like how I loved my old horse, but I love Copper more because she's actually mine." It was a terrible metaphor, but it worked for an 8-year-old. Clara hid her smile in the dishwater. Spring turned into summer, and the ranch exploded with work. They hired 2 more hands to help with the expanded operations. The cattle thrived. The water leases proved even more profitable than projected. And Clara discovered something unexpected. She was good at this life. The hard work, the problem-solving, the constant challenges. She'd found something she was genuinely talented at, and it wasn't cooking or cleaning or being decorative. It was survival, strategy, building something that mattered. Then, in late June, Clara started feeling sick. At first, she thought it was just exhaustion. She'd been working brutal hours, managing the household and helping with ranch operations. But when the nausea continued for a week, then 2, Dr. Evelyn Wu made a house call. "You're pregnant," Evelyn announced after examining her. Clara stared. "What?" "About 2 months along, I'd estimate. Congratulations." "But we didn't—" Clara's mind raced. She and Garrett had been careful, mostly. There had been a few times when careful had given way to desperate need, But she hadn't thought. Does Garrett know? Evelyn asked. Not yet, Clara said faintly. I have to tell him. Tell me what? Both women turned to find Garrett standing in the doorway, concerned. Evelyn smiled and gathered her medical bag. I'll leave you two to talk. She squeezed Clara's hand on the way out. Congratulations, you're going to be fine. After she left, Garrett moved closer. Clara? What's going on? Are you sick? No, Clara said. I'm pregnant. Garrett went absolutely still. You're... what? Pregnant. 2 months, apparently. Clara searched his face for a reaction. I know we didn't plan this. I know it's... Garrett pulled her into his arms so fiercely she couldn't breathe. Are you all right? Is the baby all right? What did Evelyn say? We're fine, Clara managed. Both fine. But Garrett, I know this is... This is everything, Garrett interrupted, his voice rough. You're carrying our child, Clara. Our child. He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were bright. I thought I'd never get this chance again. After Rebecca died, after everything, I thought I'd already had my family and lost it. But you... He couldn't finish. He just held her, and Clara felt the tension she'd been carrying since Evelyn's announcement finally release. You're happy? She asked. I'm terrified, Garrett admitted. Rebecca died in childbirth with Eli. The thought of losing you that way... His voice cracked. You're not going to lose me, Clara said firmly. Evelyn's an excellent doctor, and I'm not Rebecca. I'm stronger than you think. I know how strong you are, Garrett said. That's the only reason I'm not completely losing my mind right now. He kissed her then, gentle and desperate, and full of hope and fear in equal measure. When they told Eli that night, the boy whooped so loud he nearly fell off his chair. I'm getting a brother? He asked excitedly. Or a sister, Clara said. A sister would be okay too, I guess, Eli said generously, as long as she's not annoying. All babies are annoying, Garrett said. That's their job. The news spread through the ranch by morning and through town by afternoon. The ranch hands started treating Clara like she was made of glass, trying to prevent her from doing any work. The town women, even the cruel ones, stopped by to offer advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. And Silas Mercer made his final move. It happened in August, when Clara was 5 months pregnant and showing. She was in town picking up supplies when she saw Mercer's buggy parked outside Montgomery's office. Her stomach dropped. She hurried upstairs to find Montgomery looking grim. What's he doing here? Clara asked. Serving notice, Montgomery said, holding up papers. He's challenging the water lease agreements, claims they were made under duress and aren't legally binding. Clara's blood went cold. Can he do that? He can try, but Mrs. Hale, this is desperate. He has no real grounds. The leases are solid, the contracts were negotiated fairly, and every rancher signed willingly. Montgomery set down the papers. This is him lashing out because he lost. It won't work. But it'll cost us time and money fighting it. Some, Montgomery admitted, but not enough to break you. Not anymore. You're financially stable now, and every rancher he's challenging will fight back. He's not just taking on Wind Hollow anymore. He's taking on half the valley. Clara sat down heavily, one hand on her growing belly. Why won't he just stop? Because men like Mercer don't know how to lose, Montgomery said quietly. His whole identity is built on power and control. You took that away. He can't handle it. So what do? We let him file his challenge. We show up to court, and we beat him again. Montgomery smiled. And this time, when we win, we make sure he can never come after you again. The court case was set for September. Clara spent the weeks leading up to it preparing testimony, organizing documents, and trying not to let stress affect the baby. Garrett wanted her to stay home, let Montgomery handle everything, but Clara refused. This is my fight too, she said. I'm not sitting home while someone tries to take away everything we built. You're pregnant, which means I'm growing a human, not dying, Clara interrupted. I can sit in a courtroom, I can testify. I can watch Mercer lose one more time. Garrett knew better than to argue when she used that tone. The hearing took place in the territorial courthouse, a grand building that seemed designed to intimidate. Mercer showed up with 3 lawyers, all expensive suits and confident smirks. Clara wore her best dress, let out to accommodate her belly, and sat beside Garrett with her spine straight and her jaw set. Mercer's lawyers argued that the water leases had been negotiated under false pretenses, that Clara had manipulated struggling ranchers into signing disadvantageous contracts, that the whole arrangement was a scheme to defraud creditors. It was insulting, it was desperate, and it was obviously false. Montgomery systematically destroyed every argument. He called rancher after rancher to testify that they'd signed the leases willingly, that the terms were fair, that the water access had improved their operations. He presented documentation of every attack on Wind Hollow Ranch, showing a clear pattern of harassment that justified the emergency provisions Clara had used. Then he called Clara to testify. She walked to the witness stand, very aware of every eye in the courtroom watching the pregnant mail-order bride who dared to challenge Silas Mercer. Montgomery walked her through the timeline, arriving at Wind Hollow, discovering the debt, finding the historical documents, negotiating the leases. Clara spoke clearly, honestly, without embellishment or drama. Just facts. Then Mercer's head lawyer stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Hale, you arrived in Wyoming territory less than a year ago. Is that correct? Yes. And you have no formal education in law, land management, or business? That's correct. Yet you expect this court to believe that you, a woman with no training or experience, somehow discovered legal strategies that professional attorneys missed? Clara met his eyes steadily. I expect this court to believe that I read the available documents carefully and noticed things that weren't immediately obvious. Intelligence doesn't require formal education, sir, just attention to detail. Several people in the courtroom tried to hide smiles. The lawyer's face reddened. And these water leases you negotiated, you claim they benefit the ranchers who signed them? I don't claim it. The ranchers themselves testified it's true. Isn't it true that you pressured these ranchers into signing by threatening that Mr. Mercer would gain water monopoly if they didn't cooperate? I informed them of a potential risk, Clara said. That's not pressure. That's honesty. And you profited significantly from these leases, did you not? Wind Hollow Ranch generated income from leasing resources we legally own, yes. That's called business, not fraud. The lawyer tried several more times to rattle her, but Clara didn't budge. She answered every question calmly, honestly, and with quiet confidence that made it clear she knew exactly what she was talking about. When she stepped down, Garrett was looking at her with pure pride. The judge took 2 days to deliberate, then ruled in favor of Wind Hollow Ranch on every count. The water leases were legal, the contracts were binding, and Mercer's challenge was dismissed with prejudice, meaning he couldn't bring the same claims again. It was over. Clara stood outside the courthouse afterward, Garrett's arm around her shoulders, and felt something she'd never experienced before. Complete, absolute victory. Mercer pushed past them on his way to his buggy, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't finished," he hissed. "Yes, it is," Clara said quietly. "You lost. Accept it. I'll destroy you." "No, you won't," Garrett interrupted, stepping forward. "Because if you come near my family again, I'll make sure every rancher in the territory knows exactly how you operate. The intimidation, the sabotage, all of it. You think you have power now? Wait until your reputation is destroyed." Mercer stared at them both, then climbed into his buggy and drove away. Clara never saw him again. Word spread through Wyoming territory that Silas Mercer had been beaten by a pregnant mail-order bride with no formal education and a talent for reading fine print. Other ranchers started challenging his contracts and land claims. His empire didn't collapse, but it cracked. And he lost the aura of invincibility that had protected him for years, all because Clara Whitmore Hale had refused to be invisible. The baby came in December, during the first major snowstorm of the season. Clara's labor lasted 14 hours, long, painful, and terrifying for everyone except Clara herself, who stayed focused and determined throughout. Evelyn Wu delivered the baby with steady hands and calm expertise, while Garrett paced outside the bedroom and Eli sat on the stairs refusing to go to bed. When the baby's first cry split the air, Garrett burst into the room. "It's a girl," Evelyn announced, placing the tiny, screaming infant into Clara's arms. "Healthy, perfect, congratulations." Garrett knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face, looking at his wife and daughter like they were miracles. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's angry," Clara said, exhausted but smiling. "Listen to her yell." "Takes after her mother," Garrett said. They named her Sarah after Clara's grandmother, the only family member who'd ever been kind to her. Sarah Rebecca Hale, tiny and fierce, and completely unaware that she'd been born into a family that had fought heaven and earth to survive. Eli was allowed in to meet his sister an hour later. He stared at the small bundle in Clara's arms with wide eyes. "She's really little," he said. "You were too once," Garrett told him. "Was I this loud?" "Louder," Garrett said. Eli carefully touched Sarah's tiny hand, and her fingers closed around his. "Hi, Sarah. I'm your big brother. I'm going to teach you how to ride horses and scare chickens and everything important." Clara laughed, so exhausted she could barely keep her eyes open. "Maybe wait until she can walk first." That night, after Evelyn had gone home and Eli had finally fallen asleep, Clara lay in bed with Garrett beside her and Sarah sleeping in a cradle nearby. "Thank you," Garrett said quietly. "For what?" "For coming here, for staying, for fighting when any reasonable person would have run." He took her hand. "For giving me a reason to live instead of just survive." Clara squeezed his fingers. "You did the same for me. I spent 23 years being nobody. You made me somebody." "You were always somebody," Garrett said. "You just needed people smart enough to see it." They lay in silence, listening to their daughter's soft breathing and the wind howling outside. "Do you ever think about Missouri?" Garrett asked. "Your family?" Clara considered. "Sometimes, but they're not really my family anymore. You are. Eli is. Sarah is. And the ranch. This is home. Even though it's hard." "Especially because it's hard," Clara said. "Easy things never taught me anything except that I wasn't good enough. Hard things taught me I'm stronger than anyone gave me credit for." Garrett kissed her forehead. "Get some sleep. Sarah's going to be awake in 2 hours demanding to be fed." He was right. Sarah woke like clockwork, and the next 3 months were a blur of sleepless nights and exhausted days. But the ranch thrived despite the chaos. The water leases continued generating steady income. The timber operation expanded, and Wind Hollow Ranch became one of the most profitable properties in the territory. Clara balanced motherhood with ranch management in ways that would have horrified the proper ladies of Missouri. She nursed Sarah while reviewing contracts. She took the baby with her when she rode out to check fences. She taught Eli to help with his sister while also teaching him arithmetic and reading. "You're doing too much," Garrett told her regularly. "I'm doing exactly what needs doing," Clara replied every time. Spring arrived, and with it came a letter from Missouri. Clara recognized her mother's handwriting and almost threw it away unread. But curiosity won. She opened it in the kitchen while Sarah napped and Eli was at school lessons with the teacher who'd started coming to the ranch twice weekly. The letter was stiff and formal. Her mother wrote that Rose's marriage had fallen apart. The banker's son had gambling debts and a mistress. Margaret had married poorly, too, to a man who turned out to be cruel and controlling. The house in Missouri was struggling financially. And at the end, in handwriting that looked older and shakier than Clara remembered, her mother asked if Clara might consider sending money to help. No apology. No acknowledgement of how they'd treated her. Just a request for financial help from the daughter they'd used as a joke. Clara read the letter twice, feeling nothing. Not anger, not vindication, just a distant sadness for the people they could have been if they'd chosen differently. She wrote back a single line. "I hope you find the help you need. I can't provide it." Then she burned the letter and never looked back. Garrett found her afterwards, staring into the fireplace. "Everything all right?" "My mother wrote asking for money," Clara said. "I said no." "Do you want to talk about it?" "No," Clara said. "They made their choices. I made mine. I'm happy with where my choices led." Garrett pulled her close. "Me too." Summer brought visitors. Montgomery, who'd become a friend as much as a lawyer. Evelyn Wu, who declared Sarah the healthiest baby in the territory. And various ranchers who'd leased water rights, all of whom wanted Clara's advice on everything from contract negotiations to household management. "You should charge for consultations," Evelyn suggested one afternoon while they had coffee on the porch. "Half the territory wants your opinion on things." "I'm not an expert," Clara said. "You beat Silas Mercer in court while pregnant. You're expert enough." Clara considered this. "Maybe next year. Right now I have enough to manage." But the idea stayed with her. By fall, she'd started offering informal advice to other ranch wives. How to read contracts, how to manage household budgets, how to negotiate with suppliers. Word spread, and Clara Hale became known throughout Wyoming territory not as the plain mail-order bride, but as the woman who could solve problems other people couldn't see. On the first anniversary of Clara's arrival at Wind Hollow Ranch, Garrett surprised her with a new barn. Rebuilt bigger and better than the one Mercer had burned, the ranch hands had constructed it in secret over 3 months. "It's beautiful," Clara said, walking through the solid structure. "It's practical," Garrett corrected. "Like you." Clara punched his arm lightly. "That's still not a compliment." "Yes, it is," Garrett said. "Practical means strong, reliable, necessary. You're all of those things." He pulled her close. "You're also beautiful, but that's secondary to everything else you are." It was, Clara thought, the most perfect thing anyone had ever said to her. That night they had a celebration. All the ranch hands, several neighboring families, Evelyn Wu, Montgomery, and half the town. There was food and music and laughter, and Clara stood on her porch watching it all with Sarah in her arms, and Eli running wild with other children. "Happy?" Garrett asked, appearing beside her. "Completely," Clara said. And she meant it. 2 years later, Clara stood in the same spot, watching Eli, now 11, teach 5-year-old Sarah how to feed the chickens. The ranch was thriving. The water leases had been renewed with increased rates. The timber operation had expanded into 3 territories. And Wind Hollow Ranch had become a model for other properties in Wyoming. Clara had started teaching at the town school 2 days a week, focusing on mathematics and practical skills for girls who, like her, might benefit from learning how to think, instead of just how to be decorative. Garrett had finally stopped looking at her like she might disappear. He'd learned to trust that she was staying, that this was real, that love didn't have to end in tragedy. And Clara, the invisible girl from Missouri, the plain daughter nobody wanted, the mail-order bride who came west as a joke, had become indispensable. Not because she was beautiful, not because she was charming, not because she fit anyone's expectations of what a woman should be, but because she was smart, determined, and absolutely refused to let anyone tell her she didn't matter. One afternoon, a young woman appeared at the ranch, barely 20, terrified, carrying a single bag. She'd answered a mail-order bride advertisement for a ranch 3 territories over and gotten cold feet at the last minute. "I don't know what to do," she told Clara desperately. "I can't go back home, but I'm so scared of going forward." Clara made her tea and sat her down in the kitchen. "Tell me why you answered the advertisement." "Because I was invisible at home," the girl said quietly. "Nobody saw me. Nobody cared. I thought maybe somewhere else I could matter." Clara's throat tightened with recognition. "And now? Now I'm terrified I made a mistake. What if the rancher's cruel? What if I can't handle frontier life? What if you're stronger than you think?" Clara interrupted gently. "What if being invisible made you tougher than people who were always seen? What if the life you're scared of is actually the life where you finally become who you were meant to be?" The girl stared at her. "Did you feel this way when you came here?" "Every single day for the first month," Clara admitted. "I was terrified, but I was more tired of being invisible than I was scared of the unknown. So I stayed. And it was hard. It's still hard sometimes, but it's also the best decision I ever made." "What if I'm not as strong as you?" Clara smiled. "A year ago, I helped deliver a breech calf in the middle of a thunderstorm. 2 years ago, I couldn't have imagined doing that. You don't know how strong you are until you have to be. The question isn't whether you're strong enough. It's whether you're brave enough to find out." The girl left the next morning, heading to her rancher with terror and hope in equal measure. 6 months later, Clara got a letter thanking her and saying the girl had never been happier. Stories like that became common. Women came to Clara for advice, for courage, for proof that frontier life could be survived. And Clara gave them the same thing Evelyn Wu had given her: honest acknowledgement of the difficulty, combined with absolute faith in their ability to handle it. On a cold November evening, 5 years after Clara first stepped off the train in Wyoming, she sat on the porch of Wind Hollow Ranch watching the sun set over the mountains. Sarah was inside practicing her letters. Eli was in the barn tending horses. Garrett was finishing work in the north pasture. The ranch was successful. The family was healthy. The future was secure. And Clara Whitmore Hale, the girl nobody wanted, had built a life that mattered. She thought about the cruel joke her sisters had played, answering that advertisement on her behalf. She thought about the terrified woman who'd boarded a train west with one trunk and desperate hope. She thought about every moment of fear, every challenge overcome, every battle fought and won. And she realized something important. Strength wasn't about never being scared. It was about being terrified and doing it anyway. Worth wasn't about being beautiful or charming or fitting other people's expectations. It was about contributing something real, something that made the world better. And belonging wasn't about finding people who accepted you as you were. It was about finding people who saw your potential and helped you become more than you imagined possible. Garrett came home as the sun touched the horizon, tired and dirty and smiling. He kissed Clara's forehead and sat beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky I am," Clara said. "Lucky?" Garrett laughed. "You fought for everything you have." "I'm lucky that I was brave enough to fight," Clara said. "I'm lucky that your advertisement said no lies tolerated instead of beautiful woman wanted. I'm lucky that you saw past what I looked like to who I actually was." "I'm the lucky one," Garrett said. "You saved this ranch. You saved me. You saved Eli. You gave us a future." "We saved each other," Clara corrected. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing in the darkening sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Garrett asked quietly. "Coming here? Everything you went through?" Clara thought about Missouri, about invisibility, about spending 23 years believing she wasn't worth anything. Then she thought about Wyoming, about this ranch, about Eli and Sarah and Garrett, and the life they'd built together through sheer stubbornness and love. "Not for a second," she said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being, because the invisible girl had finally been seen. The forgotten daughter had finally found family. And the joke that was supposed to humiliate her had instead carried her toward the life she was always meant to live, a life full of purpose, challenge, love, and the knowledge that she mattered, not because someone told her she did, but because she'd proven it to herself. And that, Clara understood, was worth everything.